The stagecoach lurched to a violent stop outside the weathered ranch house, and Sarah Winters pressed her hand against the worn leather seat to steady herself. Her nursing bag clutched tightly in the other hand as dust swirled through the open window and coated her dark traveling dress in a fine layer of Colorado grit. It was late September 1882, and Aurora sat nestled in the high plains east of Denver, a town that had grown from nothing more than a railroad stop into a bustling community of ranchers, merchants, and dreamers chasing their fortunes in cattle and crops. Sarah had traveled 3 days from Kansas City, leaving behind a life that had become nothing more than going through the motions after her husband died 2 years prior from typhoid fever. She was 26 years old and felt ancient, hollowed out by grief and the endless sameness of her days working at the hospital where she had once been filled with purpose and passion. When the telegram came requesting a private nurse for a dying woman on a ranch outside Aurora, Sarah had accepted without hesitation, needing the change of scenery and the distraction more than she needed the generous pay being offered. The driver, a grizzled man with a tobacco-stained beard, climbed down and opened the door. "Eagle Creek Ranch, miss. Largest spread in these parts. The Ellisons have been here since before the war." Sarah gathered her skirts and stepped down onto the hard, packed earth, squinting against the late afternoon sun. The ranch house was larger than she had expected, a 2-story structure of weathered wood and stone that spoke of prosperity and permanence. Corrals stretched out behind it, and she could see dozens of cattle grazing in the distance against a backdrop of rolling grassland that seemed to go on forever beneath the vast Colorado sky. The air smelled of hay and horses, and something wild she could not quite name, so different from the coal smoke and crowded streets of the city she had left behind. Before she could gather her trunk, the front door swung open, and a man emerged onto the porch. Sarah felt her breath catch unexpectedly in her throat. He was tall and broad-shouldered, dressed in worn denim and a blue chambray shirt with the sleeves rolled up to reveal tanned, muscular forearms. Dark hair fell across his forehead beneath a wide-brimmed hat, and even from a distance, she could see the striking blue of his eyes and the strong line of his jaw shadowed with several days' worth of stubble. He moved with the easy confidence of a man completely at home in his body and his surroundings, taking the porch steps 2 at a time. "Miss Winters." His voice was deep and rough, and there was a weariness in it that went beyond physical exhaustion. "I am Kyle Ellison. Thank you for coming so quickly." Sarah nodded, forcing herself to focus on the professional reason for her presence rather than the unexpected flutter in her chest. She had not felt anything resembling attraction since before her husband died, had convinced herself that part of her had died with him. The sudden awareness of this stranger as a man rather than simply her employer unsettled her. "Of course, Mr. Ellison. How is your mother?" Something flickered across his face, pain mixed with frustration and fear. "Not well. The doctor comes from town twice a week, but he says there is nothing more he can do. Her lungs are failing. She has good days and bad days, but the bad days are becoming more frequent." He reached for her trunk, lifting it as though it weighed nothing. "Please, come inside. I will show you to your room and then you can meet her." Sarah followed him into the house, taking in the comfortable but masculine interior. The main room was large, with a stone fireplace dominating one wall and furniture that looked handmade and sturdy. Everything was clean but worn, and there was a notable absence of feminine touches. Kyle led her up a narrow staircase to the second floor, his boots heavy on the wooden steps. "This will be your room," he said, pushing open a door to reveal a small but pleasant space with a window overlooking the corrals. "My mother's room is just across the hall. I am at the end of the hallway if you need anything during the night." He set her trunk down and turned to face her, and she could see the exhaustion in the lines around his eyes. "I should tell you, Miss Winters, that I am not good at this. The nursing, the helplessness. I can rope a steer, break a horse, deliver a calf in a blizzard, but watching her suffer and being unable to do anything about it is killing me." The raw honesty in his voice touched something deep inside Sarah, that part of her that had chosen nursing because she wanted to ease suffering and bring comfort. "That is why I am here, Mr. Ellison. You do not have to do this alone anymore." He held her gaze for a long moment, and she saw something shift in his expression, a small easing of the tension in his shoulders. "Kyle, please call me Kyle. We do not stand much on formality out here." "Then you should call me Sarah." She managed a small smile. "Now let me meet my patient." Martha Ellison was a small woman, made smaller by illness, propped up on pillows in a large bed positioned to catch the light from the window. Her hair was white and thin, her skin pale and papery, but her eyes were sharp and clear as they studied Sarah. She was breathing with obvious difficulty, each inhale a visible effort. "So you are the nurse my son hired," Martha said, her voice thin but firm. "You are younger than I expected." "I am 26, Mrs. Ellison, and I have been a trained nurse for 7 years." Sarah moved to the bedside, her professional assessment already cataloging symptoms and needs. "I worked at the Kansas City General Hospital before coming here." "Widow?" Martha's directness was startling. "Yes, madam. 2 years now," Martha nodded slowly. "I can see it in your eyes. That look of someone who has lost everything and is just going through the motions." She glanced toward the door where Kyle had retreated to give them privacy. "My son has the same look since his father died 5 years ago. This ranch has become his whole world, and he has forgotten how to live beyond it." Sarah felt her cheeks warm, uncomfortable with the older woman's perceptiveness. "I am here to care for you, Mrs. Ellison, not to discuss my personal matters." "Humor a dying woman," Martha said with a slight wheeze. "I will not be here much longer, and I would like to know that my boy will be all right when I am gone. He needs someone, Sarah. This ranch is prosperous, but it is a lonely life, and Kyle has shut himself off from everything except work since we lost his father. Mrs. Ellison, Martha. And I can see you shutting yourself off too, trying to hide behind professionalism. But you are here now, and this place has a way of breaking down walls whether you want it to or not." She coughed, a deep, rattling sound that spoke of fluid and failing tissue. When she caught her breath again, she was paler. "Now, tell me what you need to make me comfortable, and do not lie to me about my prognosis. I already know I am dying. I just want whatever time I have left to be as peaceful as possible." Sarah spent the next hour settling in and establishing a routine with Martha. She assessed her patient's condition, noting the advanced consumption that had weakened her lungs and left her vulnerable to every infection and complication. Martha was right about her prognosis. She had weeks at best, possibly only days if pneumonia set in. But Sarah also recognized that Martha was still mentally sharp and not in acute pain, which meant her remaining time could be made comfortable with proper care. By the time Sarah came downstairs, the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson that seemed impossible in their intensity. Kyle was in the kitchen, standing at the stove in a way that suggested he was not entirely comfortable with the task. The smell of burning beans filled the air. "Let me," Sarah said, moving past him to rescue the pot before it was completely ruined. "When did you last have a proper meal?" Kyle ran a hand through his hair, looking sheepish. "We have a cook who comes in during the day, Maria. She usually leaves something I can heat up for dinner, but I told her to take a few days off while you settled in. I did not want the house to feel crowded for you." Sarah found herself suppressing a smile at his consideration even as she assessed the meager contents of the pantry. "That was thoughtful, but I do not mind company, and you clearly need someone who can cook. Do you have eggs, bacon, bread?" "Yes, all of that. Maria keeps us well stocked." Within 20 minutes, Sarah had produced a simple but substantial meal of bacon, eggs, fried potatoes, and toast. They ate at the large kitchen table, the silence between them surprisingly comfortable. Kyle ate with the single-minded focus of a man who had been skipping too many meals, and Sarah found herself watching him despite her best intentions to remain professionally distant. There was something compelling about him, a quiet strength and competence that drew her attention even as she tried to remind herself why she was here. "How is she really?" Kyle asked finally, pushing his empty plate away. "The doctor talks in circles, but I need the truth." Sarah met his gaze directly. "Your mother is dying, Kyle. Her lungs are badly damaged and her heart is weakening from the strain. I can keep her comfortable and manage her pain, but I cannot cure her. She has weeks, possibly less." She watched his jaw tighten, watched him absorb the confirmation of what he already knew but had perhaps been hoping was not true. "How long have you been caring for her alone?" "6 months since she got really bad. Before that, maybe a year of slow decline." He stood abruptly, moving to the window to stare out at the darkening landscape. "My father built this ranch from nothing. Came out here in '59 during the gold rush, realized there was more money in feeding miners than in mining, and started raising cattle. He and my mother built everything you see, survived drought and harsh winters and Indian raids and everything else this land could throw at them. She was the strongest woman I ever knew. Seeing her like this, so fragile and helpless, it goes against everything I know about her." Sarah rose and moved to stand beside him, drawn by the pain in his voice. "Being strong does not mean never being vulnerable, Kyle. It means facing difficult things with courage, and your mother is doing that. She is not afraid of dying. She is more concerned about you." He turned to look at her, and in the fading light, his eyes were impossibly blue and filled with a sorrow that resonated with her own buried grief. "I do not know how to let her go. You do not have to know right now. You just have to be here with her for whatever time remains." Sarah found herself reaching out, placing a hand on his arm before she could think better of it. The warmth of his skin through the fabric of his shirt sent an unexpected jolt through her. "And you do not have to do it alone anymore." Kyle looked down at her hand on his arm, and when he raised his eyes to hers again, there was something new in his expression, a spark of awareness that mirrored her own unwanted attraction. "Thank you for coming, Sarah. I did not realize how much I needed help until you walked through that door." Sarah withdrew her hand quickly, suddenly aware of how close they were standing and how inappropriate her gesture had been. "I should check on your mother before bed and make sure she is settled for the night." She fled before Kyle could respond, her heart beating faster than it had in 2 years. This was not why she had come. She was here to nurse a dying woman, not to develop feelings for her employer. But as she climbed the stairs, she could not deny that something had shifted inside her, some long dormant part of herself stirring to life despite her best efforts to keep it buried. Martha was awake when Sarah entered her room, her breathing labored but her eyes alert. "I heard you two talking. Kyle has not spoken that much to anyone in months. You are good for him already. Mrs. Ellison, I am here as your nurse, nothing more." "Martha," the older woman corrected. "And you are here because you are running from something, just like Kyle is running from his grief by burying himself in work. But this ranch, this land, it has a way of forcing you to face things. You cannot hide out here under this big sky." Sarah busied herself checking Martha's pulse and temperature, uncomfortable with how easily the older woman seemed to read her. "You should rest now. I gave you medication earlier that should help you sleep. I will rest soon enough, permanently." Martha caught Sarah's hand with surprising strength. "But listen to me first. I'm not saying you should have designs on my son or that you should forget your late husband. I am saying that you are still alive, Sarah, and being alive means feeling things even when it hurts, especially when it hurts. Do not waste the time you have been given." Sarah stayed with Martha until she fell asleep, thinking about her words long after the older woman's breathing had evened out into a rattling but steady rhythm. She prepared for bed in her own small room, exhausted from the long journey and the emotional weight of the day, but sleep eluded her. Through her open window, she could hear the distant lowing of cattle, the chirp of crickets, and other night sounds she could not identify. The air smelled clean and sharp, so different from the city, and the stars visible through her window were more numerous than she had ever seen. She must have eventually dozed off, because she woke suddenly to the sound of movement in the hallway. Sarah grabbed her robe and opened her door to find Kyle standing outside Martha's room, his hair disheveled as though he had been running his hands through it. "I heard her coughing," he said quietly. "Is she all right?" "It is normal for her condition. I have medicine if it gets worse." Sarah moved past him into Martha's room, checking her patient by the light of the lamp she had left burning low. Martha was sleeping fitfully, but not in acute distress. Sarah adjusted her pillows to elevate her head slightly, which would ease the breathing, then turned to find Kyle watching from the doorway with an expression of helpless concern. "Come," Sarah said softly, gesturing him back into the hallway. "There is nothing you can do right now, and you need sleep. The ranch will not run itself tomorrow." "I keep thinking I should be doing something more," Kyle admitted as they stood in the dim hallway. He was wearing only trousers and an undershirt, clearly having dressed hastily, and Sarah tried not to notice the way the thin fabric clung to his broad chest. "But there is nothing to do except watch her slip away. You are doing the most important thing, which is being here. She knows you are close by, and that brings her comfort." Sarah pulled her robe tighter around herself, suddenly aware of the intimacy of standing in a darkened hallway in their night clothes. "Kyle, you should try to sleep. I am a light sleeper, and I will hear if she needs anything." He nodded but did not move, his eyes searching her face in the shadows. "Sarah, can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Does it get easier, losing someone you love?" The question struck her like a physical blow, bringing back all the pain of those terrible weeks when she had watched her husband deteriorate, helpless to save him despite all her training. "No," she said honestly. "It does not get easier, but it changes. The sharp edges dull over time, and you learn to carry it differently. You learn that you can survive things you never thought possible. You ever stop missing them?" Sarah felt tears prick her eyes unexpectedly. "No, but you start to remember the good things instead of just the loss. And eventually, you realize that they would want you to keep living, really living, not just going through the motions." Kyle reached out and brushed away a tear that had escaped down her cheek, his touch gentle and warm. "You are still just going through the motions, are you not?" "Yes," she whispered. "I thought if I stayed busy enough, worked hard enough, it would be enough, but Martha is right, I have been hiding." "So have I." His hand lingered against her cheek, and Sarah felt her breath catch at the tenderness in the gesture. "Maybe we can help each other figure out how to stop." Sarah knew she should step back, should maintain professional distance, but she found herself frozen by the intensity of the moment and the unexpected connection forming between them. It had been so long since anyone had touched her with such gentleness, since she had allowed herself to feel anything beyond the numbness she had wrapped around her heart. I should go, Kyle said finally, dropping his hand and stepping back. Thank you, Sarah, for everything. She watched him disappear into his room at the end of the hall, her cheek still warm where his hand had been. Sarah returned to her own room but did not sleep for a long time, staring at the stars through her window and trying to understand what was happening to her. She had been so certain that she would never feel this way again, that her capacity for attraction and connection had died with her husband. But Kyle Ellison was awakening something inside her, and it terrified her as much as it exhilarated her. The next morning dawned clear and cool, and Sarah woke to the sound of roosters crowing and the distant sound of men's voices. She dressed quickly and checked on Martha, who was awake and in relatively good spirits despite a restless night. The coughing is worse in the mornings, Martha explained as Sarah helped her sit up and take her medications. But I always feel better once I have had some tea and the sun is fully up. Sarah got Martha settled with tea and toast, then went downstairs to find the kitchen bustling with activity. A plump Mexican woman with graying hair and kind eyes was cooking at the stove, and Kyle was at the table with two other men, all of them bent over what looked like account books. "Miss Sarah," the woman said warmly, "I am Maria. Mr. Kyle told me you arrived yesterday. Welcome to Eagle Creek Ranch. Thank you, Maria. Something smells wonderful." Sarah accepted the cup of coffee Maria pressed into her hands, grateful for the warmth and the caffeine. Kyle looked up from his discussion, his eyes finding Sarah immediately. "Good morning. Did my mother rest well?" "Well enough. She is having tea now and seems in good spirits." Sarah was acutely aware of the other men's curious gazes, studying her with the frank interest of people who saw few strangers. "Sarah, these are my ranch hands, Tom and Pete. They help run the day-to-day operations." Kyle stood, and Sarah noticed he looked less exhausted than he had the night before. "Gentlemen, this is Miss Winters, the nurse who is caring for my mother." The men nodded politely, offering their greetings before returning to their discussion with Kyle about cattle prices and winter feed supplies. Sarah took her coffee and a plate of eggs and beans that Maria had prepared and ate quietly, listening to the rhythm of ranch life unfold around her. It was so different from the hospital, from the structured efficiency and constant crisis of city medicine. There was a slower pace here, but also an underlying urgency driven by seasons and weather, and the needs of animals that could not be ignored. After breakfast, Sarah returned to Martha and spent the morning bathing her patient and changing the bedding, tasks that were physically demanding but also strangely intimate. Martha talked while Sarah worked, sharing stories about the early days of the ranch, about Kyle's father and how they had fallen in love despite their family's objections. "Jacob was a younger son with no inheritance and big dreams," Martha said, a wistful smile on her thin face. "My parents wanted me to marry a banker from Philadelphia, someone safe and respectable. But Jacob made me feel alive in a way that scared and thrilled me. When he decided to come west after the gold strike, I ran away from home and met him at the train station with a small bag and my grandmother's jewelry to sell for stake money. We were married by a justice of the peace before my parents even realized I was gone." "That was incredibly brave," Sarah said, helping Martha into a fresh nightgown. "It was incredibly foolish," Martha corrected with a wheezing laugh. "We had no idea what we were getting into. The first winter, we nearly froze to death in a canvas tent while Jacob tried to establish contracts with the mining camps. I had never cooked over an open fire or washed clothes in a stream or dealt with the kind of bone-deep cold that comes with a Colorado winter. There were times I was certain I had made a terrible mistake, but you stayed. I stayed because even when things were hard, Even when I was exhausted and scared and missing my comfortable life back east, Jacob made me feel alive. He saw me, really saw me, not as some delicate thing to be protected and pampered, but as a partner and an equal. We built this ranch together, and every board of this house, every fence post, represents our partnership and our love. Martha reached out and gripped Sarah's hand. That is what I want for Kyle. I want him to find someone who makes him feel that way, who challenges him and partners with him, and makes him remember that there is more to life than just surviving. Sarah felt her throat tighten with emotion. You love him very much. He is my only child, my greatest joy, and I am dying knowing that he is alone, that he has shut himself off from any possibility of happiness because he is afraid of more loss. Martha's eyes were fierce despite her weakness. Promise me something, Sarah, if I can. Promise me you will not let fear stop you from living. Whether it is with Kyle or someone else, whether it is here or somewhere else entirely, promise me you will not waste your life hiding from the possibility of pain. That is not living. That is just a slower kind of dying. Sarah blinked back tears, moved by the older woman's words and the obvious love behind them. I promise, Martha. They spent the rest of the morning in comfortable companionship, with Sarah reading aloud from a collection of poetry that Martha loved. Around noon, Kyle appeared in the doorway, hat in hand, looking uncertain. I wondered if you might like to see some of the ranch, he said, addressing Sarah but glancing at his mother for approval. Maria can sit with Mother for a while, and I thought you might want to get some fresh air. Sarah looked at Martha, who nodded encouragingly. Go on. I am tired and planning to nap anyway. You cannot spend all your time cooped up in this room with a dying woman. Martha, shoo, go see the ranch. Let my handsome son show off his kingdom. Martha's eyes twinkled with amusement, and Sarah suspected she was matchmaking quite deliberately. Kyle led Sarah outside into the brilliant midday sunshine. The temperature had warmed considerably, and the sky was a blue so intense it almost hurt to look at. He walked her to the corrals where several horses were kept, and Sarah found herself relaxing as they strolled, leaving behind the sickroom atmosphere for the vibrant energy of the working ranch. This is Dakota, Kyle said, stroking the nose of a large bay gelding. He is my primary working horse, steady and smart. That Palomino mare in the corner is Sunshine, and she is Maria's favorite for when she needs to ride into town. He paused, then gestured to a smaller chestnut mare with a white blaze. And that is Rosie. She is gentle and even-tempered. I thought maybe while you are here, if you wanted to ride, she would be perfect for you. I have not ridden in years, Sarah admitted. My husband and I used to ride in the park on Sundays when we were first married, but I have not been on a horse since he died. Would you like to try now? Nothing strenuous, just a short ride so you can see more of the ranch. Kyle's expression was open and hopeful, and Sarah found herself nodding before she could overthink it. Kyle saddled both horses with easy efficiency, and soon they were riding out across the grassland at a gentle walk. Sarah felt awkward at first, her body having forgotten the rhythm of riding, but gradually she relaxed into it. The vastness of the landscape was overwhelming after years of city living, the horizon stretching endlessly in every direction with nothing to block the view. How much land do you have? Sarah asked as they rode side by side. About 5,000 acres that we own outright, and we lease another 2,000 for grazing. We run about 1,500 head of cattle, and I employ 6 full-time hands plus seasonal workers during branding and drives. Kyle pointed to a cluster of buildings in the distance. That is the bunkhouse and barn for the working stock. We keep the operations separate from the main house to give Mother some peace and quiet. It must be a tremendous amount of work. It is, but it is work I love. I grew up on this ranch, Spent every day learning from my father how to read weather and grass conditions, how to judge cattle quality, how to manage men and money. This land is in my blood." He fell silent for a moment, and Sarah could see tension creeping back into his shoulders. "I always assumed I would have children by now to start teaching the same way my father taught me. But after he died, I just threw myself into the ranch, and the years slipped by. Now Mother is dying too, and I will be completely alone." Sarah felt her heart ache for him, understanding that particular loneliness all too well. "You are only, 28, 29. You have plenty of time to marry and have a family." 29, Kyle confirmed. "But out here, most men my age have been married for years. And honestly, I have not met anyone who understood this life, who wanted it the way I do. The few women in town are either already married or looking for husbands who will take them away to cities and civilization, not deeper into ranch life. Is that what you think women want, to escape?" Sarah felt a spark of defensiveness. "Maybe you have not met the right woman. Martha told me how she ran away from Philadelphia to come west with your father. There are women who crave this kind of life, who want partnership and purpose more than they want parlor parties and fancy dresses." Kyle turned to look at her, something shifting in his expression. "Is that what you want, Sarah?" The question caught her off guard, forcing her to confront feelings she had been trying to ignore. "I do not know what I want anymore. I thought I had my life figured out, had everything planned with my husband. We were going to open a private practice together, have children, grow old in the same house where we started. When he died, all those plans died with him, and I have been drifting ever since, just trying to make it through each day." "But you are not drifting now," Kyle said quietly. "You are here, really here, and I can see it in your eyes. This place is affecting you the same way it affected me the first time I saw it after being away at school. It gets into your soul and reminds you that you are alive." Sarah realized he was right. For the first time in 2 years, she felt present in her own life, aware of her surroundings and her body and the emotions churning inside her. The numbness that had protected her was cracking, and while it was painful, it was also exhilarating. "Your mother said something similar last night. She told me this land has a way of forcing you to face things. My mother is a wise woman." Kyle smiled, but there was sadness in it. "I am going to miss her wisdom terribly." They rode in silence for a while, the only sounds the creak of leather and the soft thud of hooves on grass. Sarah found herself hyper-aware of Kyle beside her, of the way he sat his horse with such easy grace, of the strength in his hands, and the line of his profile against the sky. She had not allowed herself to notice a man this way since her husband died, had not permitted herself to feel attraction or interest. But Kyle was breaking through her defenses without even trying, simply by being himself, by sharing his grief and his love for this land. "Thank you for bringing me out here," Sarah said as they turned back toward the ranch house. "You were right. I needed this. You are welcome anytime. Rosie will be yours to ride whenever you want while you are here." Kyle hesitated, then added, "I like having someone to share this with. The ranch hands appreciate the land, but it is not the same. You see it differently, with fresh eyes, and it reminds me of why I love it so much." They returned to find Maria on the porch, looking worried. "Miss Sarah, you should come. Mrs. Martha had a coughing fit and I could not get it to stop. She is breathing better now, but she is asking for you." Sarah dismounted quickly and hurried inside, her brief respite from the reality of why she was there abruptly ended. Martha was propped up in bed, pale and gasping, and Sarah immediately assessed the situation. Fluid was building up in her lungs faster than expected, and her heart was struggling with the increased strain. Sarah administered medication to ease the breathing and reduce the fluid, then settled in to monitor her patient closely. Kyle appeared in the doorway, his earlier relaxation replaced with tight concern. "How bad?" "This is the progression of the disease," Sarah said gently. "Her body is weakening, and these episodes will likely become more frequent. But she is stable now, and the medication should keep her comfortable." Martha, exhausted from the coughing but still conscious, reached out a trembling hand to her son. "Kyle, stop hovering in the doorway like a nervous horse. Come sit with me." Kyle moved to the chair beside the bed, taking his mother's hand carefully as though afraid she might break. Sarah busied herself tidying the medical supplies to give them privacy, but Martha's voice stopped her. "Sarah, you stay too. I want both of you here." She looked between them with those sharp, knowing eyes. "You two went riding together. Did you see the south pasture where the creek runs through? That is where Jacob proposed to me, under the cottonwood trees." It was spring, and everything was green and new, and he got down on one knee in the mud and asked me to marry him with a ring he had made himself from silver he had panned from that very creek. "Mother," Kyle's voice was thick with emotion, "let me tell my stories, son. I do not have many chances left." Martha squeezed his hand. "Sarah, did he tell you about the time a mountain lion got into the cattle when Kyle was just 15? He tracked that cat for 3 days by himself, refusing to let any of the hands help him because he said it was his responsibility. Came back with the pelt and a new understanding of what it meant to be a man and a rancher." "I was a cocky fool," Kyle said, but there was affection in his voice. "I could have gotten myself killed. You were brave and determined, just like your father, just like me." Martha looked at Sarah. "We are fighters in this family. We do not give up easily, whether it is on land or love or life. I have fought this illness as hard as I can, but I am tired now, and it is time to accept what is coming. But Kyle still has so much life ahead of him, and I want him to fight for his happiness the way his father and I fought for ours." Sarah felt tears sting her eyes at the love and concern in Martha's voice. "He will, Martha. Kyle is strong. He is strong, but he is also stubborn and afraid. He needs someone who will challenge him, who will push him to open his heart again." Martha's gaze moved between Sarah and Kyle with obvious intent. Someone who understands loss and healing, someone who makes him remember what it feels like to be alive. "Mother, you do not need to," Kyle started, his cheeks flushing. "I am dying, Kyle. I will say what I want." But Martha's voice was weakening, and Sarah could see exhaustion taking over. "Now both of you let me rest. Sarah, give me something to help me sleep, and Kyle, go do whatever it is you do on this ranch. Just be happy, both of you. Promise me that." Sarah administered a sedative, and within minutes Martha was sleeping deeply. Kyle stood slowly, his face drawn with grief and worry. Sarah walked him out into the hallway, closing the door softly behind them. "She is orchestrating," Kyle said quietly, "trying to push us together before she dies." "I know." Sarah leaned against the wall, suddenly exhausted. "Kyle, I do not want you to feel obligated or uncomfortable. I am here to care for your mother, and whatever she thinks she sees between us, what if she is right?" Kyle interrupted, turning to face her. "What if there is something between us? I have not felt this way in years, Sarah. You walk into a room and I forget what I was doing. You smile, and I find myself wanting to make you smile again. I barely know you, but I feel more alive around you than I have since before my father died." Sarah's heart was pounding so hard she was certain he could hear it. "Kyle, we have known each other for barely a day. This is too fast, too intense. You are grieving and vulnerable, and you are what? Also grieving, also vulnerable, also feeling something you did not expect." He stepped closer, and Sarah could feel the heat of his body, smell the scent of leather and horses and sun that clung to him. "I am not asking you to marry me, Sarah. I am not asking for promises or commitments. I am just asking if you feel it too, this connection between us." "Yes," Sarah whispered, unable to lie. "I feel it. But that does not mean we should act on it. I came here to do a job, and I cannot afford to be distracted by feelings that might just be a product of circumstance and emotion." Kyle nodded slowly, stepping back and giving her space. "You are right. I am sorry. I should not have pushed." He ran a hand through his hair, looking frustrated with himself. "It is just that my mother has weeks at most, and the thought of letting another chance at happiness slip away because I was too cautious or too afraid feels wrong. Kyle, I understand. But your mother needs both of us focused right now. She needs to know that you will be all right, that you are not making impulsive decisions because she is dying." Sarah reached out and touched his arm gently. "Let us just take this one day at a time. Be here for your mother, and we will see where things stand when the time is right." He covered her hand with his palm warm and calloused against her skin. "One day at a time. I can do that." But as the days passed, taking it one day at a time became increasingly difficult for both of them. Sarah fell into a routine of caring for Martha, whose condition continued to deteriorate despite Sarah's best efforts to keep her comfortable. The older woman had good moments where she was alert and talkative, sharing more stories about the ranch and her life with Jacob and Kyle's childhood. But increasingly she had bad moments where she struggled to breathe, where pain medication barely kept her comfortable, where the reality of her dying became impossible to ignore. Through it all, Kyle was a constant presence, and Sarah found herself drawn to him more with each passing day. He was attentive to his mother without being overbearing, always finding time to sit with her and hold her hand despite the demands of running the ranch. He was patient with Sarah's instructions and protective of her time, making sure she had breaks and rest even when she protested that she was fine. In the evenings after Martha had settled for the night, Sarah and Kyle fell into a habit of sitting on the porch together, drinking coffee or tea and talking about everything and nothing. He told her about growing up on the ranch, about his dreams of expanding the operation and improving the cattle bloodlines. She told him about her training as a nurse, about the satisfaction of helping people and the frustration of being unable to save everyone. They talked about books and politics and their memories of their lost spouses, sharing grief and slowly beginning to heal. One evening, nearly 2 weeks after Sarah's arrival, they were sitting on the porch watching the sunset when Kyle suddenly said, "Dance with me." Sarah looked at him in surprise. "What? Dance with me? There is no music, but I do not care. I just realized that I have not danced in 5 years, and I suddenly want to very badly, and I want to dance with you." He stood and held out his hand, his expression both vulnerable and determined. Sarah knew she should refuse, should maintain the professional distance she had been trying so hard to preserve. But Martha's words echoed in her mind about not wasting life hiding from possibilities. Slowly, she took his hand and let him pull her to her feet. Kyle drew her close, one hand on her waist and the other holding hers, and began to sway slowly to a rhythm only he could hear. Sarah rested her free hand on his shoulder, feeling the solid warmth of him, the strength in the muscles beneath her palm. They moved together on the porch in the fading light, and Sarah felt something inside her shift and settle, some piece of herself that had been lost clicking back into place. "Thank you," Kyle said softly, his breath warm against her temple, "for being here, for caring for my mother, for reminding me what it feels like to want something beyond just getting through another day." Sarah looked up at him, and the intensity in his blue eyes made her breath catch. "Kyle," he kissed her. It was gentle and tentative at first, a question more than a demand, and Sarah found herself answering by pressing closer and kissing him back. It had been so long since she had been kissed, So long since she had allowed herself to want or be wanted, and the rush of feeling was almost overwhelming. Kyle's arms tightened around her, and the kiss deepened. 2 years of loneliness and grief pouring out in the connection of lips and breath and touch. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Sarah felt tears on her cheeks. "I do not know if I can do this," she whispered. "I do not know if I am ready." "Neither do I," Kyle admitted, his forehead resting against hers. "But I know I do not want to stop trying. I know that you make me feel things I thought I would never feel again, and I do not want to let that go just because it is scary or complicated." "Your mother is dying, Kyle. This is not the time my mother is dying, which makes this exactly the time," he interrupted gently. "She has been telling us both not to waste our lives, and she is right. I have wasted 5 years hiding in work and loneliness, and I do not want to waste any more." Sarah pulled back slightly, needing space to think clearly. "What are you asking me, Kyle?" "I am asking if you will give this a chance. Give us a chance. Not now, not while Mother needs all our attention, but after. Stay after she is gone, see where this leads." His hands framed her face, his thumbs brushing away her tears. "I know it is asking a lot. I know you have a life back in Kansas City, but I think you could have a life here too if you wanted it. A real life, not just going through the motions." Before Sarah could answer, the sound of coughing came from inside the house, harsh and desperate. They broke apart instantly, both running inside to find Martha struggling for breath, her lips tinged blue from lack of oxygen. Sarah immediately took charge, administering medication and oxygen while Kyle held his mother's hand and murmured soothing words. It took nearly an hour to stabilize Martha, and by the time she was resting comfortably again, both Sarah and Kyle were exhausted. Sarah could see in Martha's declining condition that time was running out faster than she had hoped. The older woman was slipping away, and there was nothing more Sarah could do except keep her comfortable. "You should sleep," Sarah told Kyle as they stood outside Martha's room. "I will stay with her tonight." "I cannot sleep, not now." Kyle looked toward his mother's door, his face etched with pain. "How much longer? Days, maybe a week at most." Sarah touched his arm gently. "Kyle, there is something called a rally that sometimes happens near the end. The patient suddenly seems much better, almost like they are recovering. If that happens with your mother, do not let yourself hope too much. It is just the body's last surge before the end." He nodded, swallowing hard. "Thank you for telling me." "And Sarah, about what I said earlier, we will talk about it later," Sarah said softly. "Right now, your mother needs us both focused on her." The next 3 days were a blur of caregiving and vigil. Martha slipped in and out of consciousness, sometimes lucid and sometimes confused, calling for Kyle's father and reliving moments from decades past. Kyle barely left her side except when forced to by Sarah or the demands of the ranch. Maria brought food that no one had much appetite for, and the ranch hands tiptoed around with somber faces, everyone aware that the matriarch of Eagle Creek Ranch was dying. On the 4th day, Martha suddenly rallied. She woke clear-eyed and alert, her breathing easier than it had been in weeks. She asked for food and ate a full breakfast, chatted with Maria about recipes, and even asked Kyle to carry her downstairs so she could see the main room of the house one last time. "I want to look at everything," she said, as Kyle settled her on the sofa with blankets tucked around her. "I want to remember it all." Sarah watched her patient carefully, seeing the unnatural brightness in her eyes, the feverish energy that was so at odds with her physical decline. This was the rally she had warned Kyle about, and it broke her heart to see his hope kindling despite her warning. "Mother, you seem so much better," Kyle said, kneeling beside the sofa and taking her hand. "Maybe you are turning a corner." "No, sweetheart, I am saying goodbye." Martha smiled at him with infinite tenderness. I know what this is, I can feel it. But I am grateful for it, for this one last good day to tell you everything I need to say. Kyle's face crumpled, and he pressed his forehead against her hand. I do not know how to do this without you. Yes, you do. You are strong and capable, and this ranch will thrive under your care just as it did under your father's. But Kyle, promise me you will not let the ranch become your whole life the way you have been. Promise me you will take the chance that Sarah represents, that you will let yourself love again and be loved. Martha reached out with her other hand to Sarah, who had been standing back to give them privacy. Come here, dear. Sarah moved to the sofa, taking Martha's outstretched hand. The older woman's skin was papery and cool despite the false energy animating her. Sarah, you are a good woman and a fine nurse, but you have been as lost as my son. You two have found each other at exactly the right moment, and I believe that is not coincidence but providence. Martha squeezed both their hands. Promise me you will not let fear keep you apart. Promise me you will fight for happiness the way Jacob and I fought for ours. Martha, I care for your son, but I do not want to make promises I cannot keep, Sarah said honestly. I do not know what the future holds. None of us do, dear. That is the point. But you have a choice about how you face that uncertain future, whether you face it alone or together. Martha's voice was weakening now, the rally already beginning to fade. Kyle, take Sarah out to the creek tomorrow. Show her where your father proposed to me. Let this land work its magic on her the way it did on me. I will, Mother, I promise. Kyle's voice was thick with tears. Martha smiled, her eyes drifting closed. Good, that is good. Now help me back to bed. I am very tired. Kyle carried his mother upstairs, and Sarah helped settle her back in bed. Martha fell asleep almost immediately, her breathing shallow and labored once more. Sarah could hear the rattle in her chest that signaled the very end was near. Tonight or tomorrow, she told Kyle quietly as they stood in the hallway. I am so sorry. Kyle nodded, his jaw tight as he fought for control. I will sit with her. I want to be there. I will be right across the hall if you need me. But Sarah did not sleep. She lay in her bed listening to the sounds of the house, the creak of the rocking chair in Martha's room where Kyle was keeping vigil, the distant cry of a coyote, the wind in the eaves. She thought about Martha's words, about promises and choices and fighting for happiness. She thought about Kyle and the way he made her feel, the way this land had crept into her soul and made her want to stay even though it terrified her to imagine opening her heart again. Just before dawn, she heard Kyle's voice calling her name, urgent but controlled. Sarah threw on her robe and crossed the hall to find Martha awake and struggling, her eyes moving between Kyle and Sarah with obvious effort. I am here, Martha, Sarah said, taking her patient's hand. She could feel the thready, irregular pulse, see the bluish tinge to her lips. The end was minutes away. Good, Martha whispered. Both here. Good. She looked at Kyle with all the love a mother could hold. Proud of you, so proud. Your father would be too. I love you, Mother, Kyle said, tears streaming down his face. Thank you for everything. Martha's gaze moved to Sarah. Take care of him. Love him. I will take care of him, Sarah promised, not able to commit to more but meaning what she said with her whole heart. Martha smiled, a peaceful, contented expression. Good, so tired now. Jacob is waiting, I can see him. Her eyes drifted closed and her breathing slowed, each breath coming farther apart until finally, gently, it stopped altogether. Kyle let out a sound that was half sob, half moan, and Sarah moved around the bed to hold him as he wept for his mother. She held him through the dawn and into the morning light, held him as Maria came and cried with them, held him as the doctor arrived to officially pronounce Martha dead, held him as the undertaker was sent for and arrangements were made. The funeral was 3 days later, held at the small church in Aurora, with what seemed like half the town in attendance. Sarah stood beside Kyle through the service, watching as person after person came to pay their respects and share stories about Martha Ellison and her generosity, her strength, her sharp wit. It was clear that Martha had been beloved, and Sarah felt privileged to have known her even for such a short time. After the burial in the small cemetery on a hill overlooking the ranch, Kyle and Sarah returned to the house that felt too empty without Martha's presence. Maria had prepared food for the guests who came back to the ranch, and for several hours the house was full of people and voices. But eventually, everyone left, and Kyle and Sarah were alone with their grief. "I should start looking into returning to Kansas City," Sarah said as they stood on the porch watching the sunset, both of them exhausted. "You do not need a nurse anymore, and I should not impose on your hospitality." Kyle turned to look at her, his eyes red-rimmed but direct. "Is that what you want, to go back to Kansas City?" Sarah thought about it honestly, examining her feelings. "No," she admitted, "but I do not want to presume. You asked me to stay before your mother died, but that was in a moment of emotion. Now that she is gone, you might feel differently." "I do not feel differently. If anything, I am more certain." Kyle took both her hands in his grip warm and steady. "Sarah, these past 3 weeks with you have shown me what my life could be. You have made me laugh and challenged me and made me want to wake up in the morning for reasons beyond ranch work. My mother saw it, and she was right. I am falling in love with you, and I do not want you to leave." Sarah felt her heart race, joy and fear warring inside her. "Kyle, I care for you deeply. But we have known each other less than a month. How can we be sure this is real and not just the intensity of the situation we have been through?" "We cannot be sure," he acknowledged. "But is there ever certainty in love? My parents took a chance on each other with no guarantees. Your marriage to your husband started with hope and faith, not certainty. I am not asking you to marry me tomorrow, Sarah. I am asking you to stay, to give us time to figure out if what we feel is real and lasting. Stay for a few months. Let me court you properly. If at the end of that time you want to return to Kansas City, I will understand and accept it. But please, give us a real chance." Sarah looked out at the land that had somehow become precious to her, at the vast sky and rolling grassland that made her feel small and significant all at once. She thought about Martha's words about not wasting life, about fighting for happiness. She thought about the numbness she had been living in for 2 years and how Kyle had made her feel alive again. "I will stay," she said, her voice steady despite the tears in her eyes. "I will stay and see where this leads." Kyle pulled her into his arms, holding her close as the sun set in a blaze of gold and crimson. "Thank you," he whispered against her hair. "Thank you for taking a chance on us." The next months passed in a rhythm that felt both new and ancient. Sarah officially stayed on at the ranch, moving from the role of nurse to something harder to define but equally important. She helped Maria with the house, learned to cook meals that could feed hungry ranch hands, and began to understand the cycles and demands of ranch life. She rode Rosie almost daily, sometimes with Kyle and sometimes alone, exploring the land and feeling it seep into her bones. Kyle courted her with old-fashioned determination, bringing her wildflowers from the prairie, teaching her to rope and shoot, taking her to town dances where they scandalized the gossips by dancing too many dances together. He introduced her to the neighboring ranchers and their families, showing her off with obvious pride. He was patient with her moments of fear and doubt, never pushing but always steady, always there. They talked for hours about everything, learning each other's quirks and habits, sharing their pasts and dreaming about their futures. Kyle told her about his plans for the ranch, about breeding programs and irrigation projects and expanding into horse raising. Sarah told him about her dreams of opening a small clinic in Aurora, where she could provide medical care to people who could not afford the doctor's high fees. They began to speak not of his future or her future, but of their future, the words slipping naturally into their conversations. The first time Kyle kissed her after his mother's death, they were at the creek where his father had proposed to his mother. It was late autumn, and the cottonwood trees were golden against the blue sky. They had ridden out for a picnic, and as they sat by the water, Kyle had taken her hand. "My mother wanted me to bring you here," he said. "She believed this place was special, that it had witnessed real love and could inspire it in others." "It is beautiful," Sarah agreed, watching the water ripple over rocks. "Sarah, I love you." The words were simple but filled with certainty. "I have loved you since you told me I did not have to face losing my mother alone. I love your strength and your compassion and the way you look at this land like it is a miracle. I love that you challenge me and make me laugh and make me want to be better. I know it has only been a few months, but I am sure of this. I am sure of you, of us." Sarah turned to him, her heart full to bursting. "I love you too, Kyle. I did not think I could feel this way again, but you have shown me that the heart has room for more than one love, that healing does not mean forgetting. I love you, and I want to build a life here with you." Kyle kissed her then, deep and passionate and full of promise. When they finally broke apart, he pulled a small box from his pocket. Inside was a ring, a simple band of silver inlaid with a small turquoise stone. "This is not the proposal," he said quickly. "Not yet. But I had this made for you. From silver I panned from this creek, just like my father did for my mother. I want you to wear it as a promise, as a symbol that we are building towards something permanent." Sarah took the ring with trembling fingers, slipping it onto her right hand. "It is beautiful." "Thank you." They rode back to the ranch as the sun was setting, and that night Kyle asked if she would sit with him in his father's study. The room was lined with books and ledgers, a masculine space that smelled of leather and tobacco. "I want to show you something," Kyle said, pulling out a thick ledger. "These are the ranch accounts. My mother always knew every detail of the ranch finances, and she was as much a partner in the business as my father. If you are going to be part of this ranch, part of my life, I want you to understand how everything works. I want you as a true partner, Sarah, not just a wife who stays in the house while I handle the ranch." Sarah felt a surge of love and respect for him. Kyle was offering her exactly what Martha had described, a real partnership built on mutual respect and shared goals. They spent the evening going over the accounts, with Kyle explaining the economics of ranching and Sarah asking questions and offering suggestions. It felt right, felt like the beginning of something strong and lasting. Winter came, and with it the harsh reality of Colorado weather. Sarah experienced her first blizzard, a 3-day whiteout that trapped them all inside and tested her courage. Kyle and the ranch hands worked around the clock to keep the livestock alive, breaking ice on water troughs and hauling feed through chest-deep snow. Sarah helped Maria cook for the men and learned to keep the fires burning and the house warm. When the storm finally passed, the land was transformed into a glittering white wonderland. Kyle took Sarah outside, and they walked through the snow-covered landscape, their breath forming clouds in the frigid air. "This is the hardest part of ranch life," Kyle said, his arm around her shoulders. "The winters are brutal and there is always loss. Cattle die, horses get injured, men get frostbite. It is part of the bargain we make with this land." "I understand," Sarah said, "and I am not afraid. I have seen death and suffering in the hospital, and I know that life here will have its share of both. But there is also so much beauty and purpose. I want to be part of it, Kyle. I want to face the hard times and the good times together." On Christmas Eve, Kyle proposed properly. He arranged for Maria to prepare a special dinner, and after they ate, he led Sarah out onto the porch where he had hung lanterns and laid out blankets against the cold. The night was clear and freezing, and the stars were so bright they seemed close enough to touch. Kyle got down on one knee in the snow, just as his father had all those years ago, and took Sarah's hands in his. "Sarah Winters, you came into my life when I needed you most, and you have made me believe in happiness again. You are my partner, my love, my best friend. Will you marry me? Will you stay on this ranch and build a life with me and be my wife?" "Yes," Sarah said, tears freezing on her cheeks. "Yes, I will marry you." Kyle slipped a proper engagement ring onto her left hand, a gold band with a small diamond that had belonged to his mother. "She wanted you to have this," he explained. "She made me promise to give it to you when the time was right." Sarah looked at the ring through her tears, feeling Martha's presence and approval. She would be so happy. "She is," Kyle said with certainty. "I can feel it." They were married in February in the same church where Martha's funeral had been held. Sarah wore a simple white dress that Maria helped her make, and Kyle wore a new suit that looked uncomfortable on his rancher's frame. The church was packed with neighbors and friends, all curious to see the nurse from Kansas City who had captured the heart of Aurora's most eligible bachelor. The minister who performed the ceremony spoke about love and partnership, about two people choosing to face life's challenges together. Sarah looked at Kyle as they exchanged vows, seeing in his eyes the same certainty she felt in her heart. They were meant for this, meant for each other. The reception was held at the ranch, with tables set up in the barn and dancing to a fiddle band Kyle had hired from town. Sarah danced until her feet hurt, swept from partner to partner by the ranch hands and neighbors all wanting to welcome her properly to the community. But she saved the last dance for Kyle, and they swayed together in the lantern light, surrounded by friends but aware only of each other. "I love you, Mrs. Ellison," Kyle whispered in her ear. "I love you too," Sarah replied, the name feeling perfect on her. She was Sarah Ellison now, no longer just going through the motions but fully, vibrantly alive. The years that followed were not always easy, but they were rich and full. Sarah opened her clinic in Aurora, a small building on Main Street where she treated everyone from cowboys with broken bones to children with fevers to women in childbirth. She charged what people could afford and often accepted payment in goods or services, becoming beloved in the community for her skill and compassion. Kyle expanded the ranch, adding the horse breeding program he had dreamed about and improving the cattle herd through careful selection. He and Sarah worked side by side, partners in every sense of the word. They fought sometimes, passionate arguments about money or decisions or the 100 small things that married people disagree about. But they always talked it through, always remembered that they were on the same team. 2 years after their wedding, Sarah gave birth to their first child, a son they named Jacob after Kyle's father. Kyle cried when he held his son for the first time, overcome with joy and gratitude. Sarah watched her husband cradle their baby and felt a completeness she had never imagined possible. She had thought her life was over when her first husband died, but instead, it had simply been a chapter ending. This was a new chapter, one filled with more love and happiness than she had dared to hope for. 3 years later, they had a daughter they named Martha. She had her grandmother's sharp eyes and stubborn spirit, and Kyle was wrapped around her tiny finger from the moment she was born. Sarah would sometimes find him sitting in the nursery just watching Martha sleep, a look of wonder on his face. "I cannot believe this is my life," he told Sarah one night as they prepared for bed. Sometimes I think about where I was before you came, how lost and alone I was, and it feels like a different life entirely. You saved me, Sarah. We saved each other, Sarah corrected, kissing him softly. Your mother was right about everything. This land did force me to face my grief and my fear, and you made me feel alive again. I cannot imagine being anywhere else or with anyone else. As the children grew, Sarah taught them about medicine and compassion, while Kyle taught them about the land and the animals and the hard work of ranching. Jacob showed an early aptitude for working with horses, while Martha was fascinated by her mother's medical practice. They were good children, raised with love and discipline, and the understanding that they were part of something larger than themselves. On quiet evenings, Sarah and Kyle would sit on the porch as they had in those early days of their courtship, watching the sunset and talking about their days. Kyle would tell her about the new foal that had been born or the fence that needed mending. Sarah would tell him about the patients she had seen, the lives she had helped save or comfort. They talked about their children, about their dreams for the future, about the ranch and the town and the life they were building together. Sometimes Sarah would think about her first husband, remembering him with fondness, but without the sharp pain that had once accompanied those memories. She had loved him, and his death had devastated her, but she had survived and found love again. It did not diminish what she had shared with him to acknowledge that what she had with Kyle was different but equally real and precious. You ever regret it? Kyle asked her one evening when they were both in their 40s and their children were nearly grown. Giving up your life in Kansas City, your career at the hospital, you could have remarried there, had an easier life. Sarah looked at him in genuine surprise. Never, not for a single moment. This life, this place, you and the children, this is where I was meant to be. I did not know it when I stepped off that stagecoach all those years ago, but your mother was right. This land does have a way of forcing you to face things, and it gave me back my life. Kyle took her hand, his grip still strong despite the years. My mother would be so pleased to see us now, to see our children and the life we have built. She knows, Sarah said with certainty. Wherever she is, she knows, and she is proud of us. As the sun set over the grassland, painting the sky in those impossible colors that Sarah had never gotten used to despite decades of watching them, she felt a peace and contentment that went bone deep. She had come to Eagle Creek Ranch to nurse a dying woman, expecting to stay a few weeks before returning to her hollow life in Kansas City. Instead, she had found a home, a partner, a family, and a purpose that filled every corner of her heart. The cowboy had made her feel alive again, just as the title of her story promised, and together they had built something beautiful and lasting. The ranch thrived under their partnership, the town benefited from Sarah's medical skills, and their children grew up knowing they were loved and valued. It was not a fairy tale life without challenges or sorrows, but it was a real life, fully lived and deeply felt. Years later, when Sarah was an old woman with silver hair and grandchildren playing in the yard, she would sit on that same porch and remember the day she arrived, dusty and grieving and hollow. She would remember Martha's wisdom and Kyle's patient courtship, and the way this land had crept into her soul and refused to let go. She would remember learning to ride again, to laugh again, to love again. And she would thank God and Martha, and the wild chance that had brought her to Colorado, to this ranch, to the cowboy who had needed her as much as she needed him. It had been a healing for both of them, a second chance neither had expected, but both had been brave enough to grab hold of and fight for. Their love story was not the first chapter of either of their lives, but it was the longest and the sweetest, and it proved that the heart has an infinite capacity for love if only we are brave enough to open it again. Martha had been right about everything. The land had forced Sarah to face her grief and fear, and Kyle had made her feel alive again. Together, they had built a legacy of love and partnership that would endure for generations, a testament to the power of second chances and the courage it takes to choose happiness over fear. As the sun set on Eagle Creek Ranch one last time in Sarah's memory, she smiled, knowing that her story had a perfect ending. She had come to nurse a dying woman and stayed because the cowboy made her feel alive again. And in doing so, she had found not just love but a whole new life richer and fuller than anything she had imagined possible. It was a good life, a blessed life, and she had lived every moment of it with gratitude and joy, just as Martha had asked her to promise all those years ago.